Mary Guthrie was born, raised, and educated just down the road in Fayetteville. She recently received a BA in creative writing from the University of Arkansas, and for her honors college thesis, she wrote and defended a collection of short stories entitled Tales from Booger County. Now, everybody in this room, if we said Tales from Booger County, you'd know where we're talking about, wouldn't you? These stories depict life in Madison County during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. She originally became interested in studying Madison County because it is where her mother's family is from, and she was interested in learning more about the world in which her grandparents grew up. Please join me in welcoming Mary Guthrie.
All right, good morning or good afternoon now, I suppose. Thank you so much for coming today. This is the first talk I've ever given, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm so happy to see so many friendly faces in the room and several people who I know. That's fantastic. First, let's do a show of hands. Who is from Madison County? All right. And how many of you have been to Madison County sometime in your life? Yeah. All right. Do any of you know why it's called Booger County? Nope, I don't either, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to ask. So as Susan said, I'm not actually from Madison County, but my mom's side of the family is. And I started researching this area because I wanted to learn more about my grandparents and especially more about my grandfather, Harold Ray Smith, who was an important role model to me. And I started looking at the post-World War II era, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, because he was born in 1938, and that's the time he would have grown up. Something interesting I found researching this is that most of the written history of Madison County was done by folklorists, and it's for the teens, 20s, and even earlier, the Civil War era. So most of what I had to go on was interviews and like letters that people had written to each other. And I did use one book that was extremely helpful, Mayor Kevin Hatfield's History of Huntsville that came out recently. I'll be quoting that a lot today. All right, let's begin then. Madison County is just to the east of here. Its largest city is Huntsville. That's also the county seat. As of 2010, the population of the county was 15,717 people. Some of its other towns and communities include Hinesville, St. Paul, Kingston, Marble, Alabama, Pettigrew, Wesley, and Combs. We're going to go back to the very beginning of Madison County. The first people to live there were the Paleo Indians around 12,000 to 10,000 BC. They were hunters and gatherers, and as the millennia passed, the natives of the region developed complex agricultural societies. When French tradesmen entered the area in the 1670s, they encountered a tribe called the Wajaji, I think. I probably butchered that. Because the French did not have W's in their alphabet, the Frenchmen could not pronounce the tribe's name, much like I can't pronounce the tribe's name. Instead, they said Osage, which later became Osage. The Osage were a warlike tribe, and their want of horses to use in raids contributed to their trade with the French. In 1803, President James Madison purchased the Louisiana Territory from France, and he ordered the territory to be surveyed starting in 1815 to establish a system for distributing land to the veterans of the War of 1812. Congress created the Arkansas Territory on March 2nd, 1819, and it included what is present-day Arkansas and Oklahoma. Settlers began to arrive in the Madison County area around 1827, and the county was established shortly after Arkansas became a state in 1836. So that's just a little bit of background on Madison County. I'm going to skip ahead to the Great Depression now. By the time of the Great Depression, Madison County was a poor rural area comprised of farmers and lumber workers, and Huntsville, for example, had fewer than 800 people. But because travel in and out of the area was difficult, the people living there knew no other way of life. When asked about the Depression during an interview, Ellen Hudson said, "Well, I, like most of the people who lived in Madison County, didn't really know that we were bad off because everybody else was in the same boat. There was very little money available, and everybody had plenty to eat because we lived on farms and we grew everything that we ate. If you needed a pound of coffee or something, you would take a dozen eggs to the store for the coffee. We would get one pair of shoes a year and this sort of thing. I said in the beginning, we didn't know we were poor till we left here. Never realized we were poor until somebody told us we were. We always had plenty to eat, but we didn't have much money. Since the beginning of the century, people had been leaving the county to find work. Many did not return, but those who did oftentimes brought ideas of how to modernize and improve the county. One example is Orville Faubus, who was around that time the editor of the Madison County Record, but later became a 6-term governor of Arkansas. He had this to say about Arkansas migrant workers. Well, with all the activity, the main interest was for industrial jobs, because people were still leaving Arkansas. They were still going to California, Oregon, Washington. I went out there myself and came back. I found out that they would hire Arkansas people as quickly, if not more quickly, than people from anywhere else. We've worked hard all our lives here. We've had to in order to exist. So when we got a job there, we worked hard and were dependable, so Arkansas people made good employees. Well, if they made good employees away from home, if an industrialist would put a plant here so that he could hire good employees right here, then they wouldn't have to leave home. Meanwhile, FDR's depression programs like the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA, were at work in Madison County and the rest of the nation, overseeing the construction of buildings, parks, bridges, and roads, and providing jobs to people across the nation. It was a busy time in Madison County, and it brought the ideas of modernization, industrialization, and general improvement closer to the minds of its residents. And by 1942, Kevin Hatfield says, it was nearly like someone had turned off the proverbial water and lights, with the last one leaving to shut the door. That is, with its attention moved elsewhere, the federal government ended its make-work programs, and Madison County, which was at one time the poorest county in the state, lost its support for self-improvement. But they hadn't lost their desire for it. They simply did not have the funds to make good of their intentions. For Madison County, the next 3 decades would be defined by patience in the face of numerous failures and a slow but steady climb toward progress. Our first example of this is Huntsville's struggle for a functioning water and sewer system. The need for a clean town had long been in the minds of Huntsville residents. As early as 1925, an ordinance was passed to keep premises in sanitary condition. It stated the following: that all residents are required to keep all toilets, stables, barns, and all outhouses and ground free from filth, rubbish, weeds, trash, or anything of any kind calculated to injure the health of the inhabitants of said town, and all persons are required to disinfect all toilets, stables, barns, and outhouses owned or controlled by them according to the instructions as proclaimed by the mayor or board of health of said town. Any persons who fail to do so would be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor and would be fined between $5 and $25, and if they didn't pay the fine, they would be imprisoned. By 1940, Huntsville had a privately owned water system, but no sewer system. According to Hatfield, some of the residents and businesses had septic systems, with many having leaching system failures, evidenced by cesspools. For most, the numerous brooks and spring-fed branches in the town served as a sewer system. The smell was quite pungent, especially during the hot summer months and during periods of low water flow. Because of the aid they had been receiving from the WPA, the City Council jumped at the chance to get a WPA-funded program to build a sewage collection and treatment plant. They invited an engineer from the State Health Department to inspect the city and issue an official report. He found numerous cases of pollution that he described as deplorable to disgraceful, and he couldn't believe a town that had been growing so much over the past 10 years could have such conditions. However, the petition to the WPA was ignored as, again, the nation had turned its attention toward the war. The next time the issue of water and sanitation would be raised was not until 1951, in reaction to the fire hazard problem in Huntsville, namely that every few years part of the square would catch on fire and burn down. Huntsville abandoned the town spring in 1951 in favor of War Eagle Creek and built a distribution system and 17 fire hydrants that would put 90% of the homes in reach of fire protection, although the town still had no real fire station or fire truck. By 1959, the lack of a sewage treatment plant was becoming an issue in bringing industry to the area, and the health hazards this posed had only increased. Hatfield now described the situation thusly. All of the city's drainage ditches and branches had turned into a sewer system. Most of the time, the town smelled of raw sewage. The water in all of the town's drainage ditches reflected a light purple cast and was rank with garbage, human waste, and high levels of phosphates to the point that large suds formations were visible at all times for most of the roadways. Sewage and refuse was flowing down the gutters of the main section of town in front of the cafes, grocery stores, and other business establishments. The mayor and city council hired a Fayetteville civil engineer to plan and advise the project. Meanwhile, they petitioned Little Rock and Dallas for grants. In 1964, a water and sewer system still had not been built, but the town would finally have enough money in loans and grants, so long as they could get enough customers to sign up. They especially wanted a poultry plant, like the one starting in Springdale, to help them repay their loans. By March, the system was calculated to be $90,000 more than the city had available in loans, so they immediately filed an application with the Housing and Home Finance Administration to increase the amount of the loan. Finally, on May 6, 1964, construction finally began on the new sewer system. Huntsville had waited 40 years for this, and while it would lead to new problems, for instance, the city had torn up its roads in order to install the new system and now did not have the money to repair the roads, at least this much had been accomplished. But cleanliness was not the only issue that the county was facing. The old and new ways of education were also butting heads. Madison County, like most places, started out with one-room schoolhouses that could hold 8 grades at a time. In 1948, the state of Arkansas passed Act No. 1 that required each school district to have at least 350 enumerates and be able to provide instruction in grades 1 through 12. To accomplish this, the county school board designed originally for the county to be split into 5 districts: Clifty, Huntsville, Kingston, St. Paul, and Wesley. However, the issue was hotly debated among the county residents. According to Dr. Jasper Northcutt, who was the Madison County Supervisor of Schools at the time, people in rural areas thought those people in Little Rock were trying to take the rural people's schools away from them and move them to town. They argued that consolidation would destroy the community life around the site of the schools or take away local control. When Dr. Northcutt sent petitions to local school boards asking for their signatures to form the districts, he received few responses. In the end, he had to visit the school boards in person and explain the new law to them. People blamed the upcoming consolidation on Dr. Northcutt, and many threats were made against his life. He was warned not to appear in the districts, but he went anyway. He delicately and deliberately explained the new law, and he found that many people were simply misinformed as to what the act was to do. Many people were more positive after this. The final consolidation plan was ready and implemented by the county in 1949. It drew up 3 districts instead of 5: Huntsville, Kingston, and St. Paul. Elementary schools would be left in isolated districts, and wing schools would continue operating, as suggested by Dr. Northcutt. However, these wing schools would soon be doomed by the very people who wanted to keep their community schools, for they would soon realize that children in the larger schools received more benefits, and they wanted the same for their children. One school teacher, Miss Willia Parker, described her year's teaching after 1941. I took the teacher's examination and received a certificate to teach. This time my destination was Witter, another one-room school, all 8 grades plus my own small son. We soon added hot lunches for our pupils by cooking on the old wood stove that warmed the classroom, with myself as chief cook. After leaving Witter, I taught at Ball Creek and Henderson Creek, both one-room schools and 8 grades. Here I was furnished a cook. At this time, consolidation was catching up, and I was asked to join the faculty at St. Paul. Here I taught 3rd grade for 7 years, my first experience with 1 grade only. But consolidation had its own share of problems. The Huntsville district took on the greatest number of students. 9 other schools had been added to the attendance center, and by 1957 it would have 1,463 students enrolled, which was more than the number of people actually living in Huntsville at the time. Meanwhile, the Huntsville State Vocational School, which was only one of 2 in the state, lost its funding, and in 1957 it was abolished by the state legislature. The funds were transferred to the Huntsville School District and used to create a junior high school comprised of grades 7, 8, and 9. It would be housed in the old grade school, while 3 new concrete block buildings would be built alongside the Madison County Fairgrounds to house grades 1 through 6. Also, as part of the building project, new hardwood floors, fluorescent lighting, and new plumbing for the bathrooms were being installed in the high school. The board also announced the construction of a science building on campus, and physical science, biology, chemistry, and physics could be added to the curriculum. It seemed things were going well for the new school district, but by 1961, it was again facing overcrowding and academic deficiencies when officials from the Arkansas Department of Education inspected and reviewed the schools. It had been 13 years since the consolidation, and Huntsville had only added 8 new classrooms. The average size for a class of 7th and 8th graders was 45 students, and some classes had more than 50 students, with only one teacher who was required to teach all subject matter, even if they were not certified to teach it. The inspectors also noted adverse conditions, for example, noise, especially in classrooms next to the gymnasium. Most of the classrooms were furnished with antique desks and lacked any instructional materials like maps, globes, or bulletin boards. There was one film projector, but no film screen. The only thing the county could do was increase the millage its residents were paying. And while usually the county was stubborn against taxing itself, the voters approved of the millage. Even so, the district was only able to hire 5 new teachers and replace the students' desks. There was not enough money to build new classrooms, and there continued to be 40 students per class. In 1964, the Huntsville schools called upon experts, that is, anyone over 20 miles away from home, to survey and study the school's needs. The Arkansas Department of Education sent 2 men from Little Rock to assess the matter. They found, according to Hatfield, students having class in a dirt-floored and dirt-walled abandoned coal bin, a class being held in a locker room with gym shorts, old T-shirts, dirty towels, etc. on the floor, science classes being held in the bleachers of the gymnasium, and elementary classes being held in the basements of at least 2 churches. The lunchroom was so small that in order to feed grades 1 through 9, first grade would begin lunch at 10 o'clock a.m., as almost 1,000 kids would have to be fed in the 3-hour period. Huntsville passed another millage increase, and there was overwhelming support for it, despite it being within 3 years of the last increase. Huntsville was able to use the money to build a new elementary school and to modernize the high school building, equipping it with specially designed math and foreign language labs. Both schools would be colored turquoise and burnt orange, which was popular in the 1960s, and the hallways in the elementary school would be lit by skylights. So finally, the battle for the schools was won. There were many other challenges that the county had to face during this 30-year period, but it had many success stories too. The people of Madison County had many ideas of how to open the area up to the rest of the world. One was the building and paving of roads through the county, especially through Huntsville. November 10, 1949, was Huntsville's largest celebration in its history, a celebration of the dedication and completion of Highway 68 from Huntsville to Springdale. All of Northwest Arkansas was involved, with dignitaries from Fayetteville, Springdale, Rogers, and Bentonville in attendance, as well as visitors from Eureka Springs, Berryville, and Harrison. Every community in the 6-county area had representatives in Huntsville, and the crowd was estimated at around 6,000 people. Even Governor Sid McMath would be attending. It was the first time that the Huntsville area was made accessible to the outside world by a paved road. The town celebrated with a 5-hour program to include a parade of schools, school bands, fox and coon hunters, legionnaires, and riding clubs. There would also be the largest dinner on the grounds ever held in Northwest Arkansas, called the Ozark Feast. The feast was like a huge potluck, as people from all over the county and from neighboring counties would be bringing food such as turkey, chicken, pork, beef, cakes, pies, jams, jellies, pickles, casseroles, and all kinds of vegetables. It was a big day for Huntsville and Madison County, and not the last time the county would grab national attention. For some time, Madison County became known as the crossbow capital of the United States. How this happened was that in 1957, Huntsville pharmacist Arliss Koger went to the annual tournament in Blanchard Springs and spoke with the event coordinator, George Stevens, about moving the tournament to Huntsville. Mountain View had recently changed from crossbow to a bow and arrow tournament, and Stevens was interested in finding another place in the Ozarks to host it. He was soon invited to Huntsville by the Chamber of Commerce, where he explained the benefits of the national tournament to local businessmen. Everyone was very interested. According to Hatfield, Huntsville and Madison County needed an identity that would draw tourists and tourist dollars. The plan was to eventually build a medieval castle and a fine restaurant to accompany the tournament. While the castle was never built, a fine restaurant did open, one that's still around today, the Crossbow Restaurant. In 1958, the Crossbow Restaurant was constructed, becoming the most modern and up-to-date restaurant in northwest Arkansas at that time. There was parking space for over 100 cars, and it could seat up to 160 customers. Dishes were introduced that had never been tasted in the area before. Shrimp cocktail, shrimp, red snapper, pheasant under glass, oysters on the half shell, apple pie au gratin. There were also the regular menu items, such as steaks, chicken, and the Crossbow Jumbo Burger. The Crossbow Restaurant attracted guests from as far away as Tulsa, including country western singer Marvelous Marvin McCullough. Another event that brought Madison County to the nation's attention was Orville Faubus's governorship. Orville Faubus was a native of Huntsville, and he worked for many years as the editor of the Madison County Record. He was elected as the 36th governor of Arkansas in 1955 and served for an unprecedented 6 terms. Twice, he brought E. Fay Jones to Huntsville, and the soon-to-be-famous architect designed both the new headquarters for the Madison County Record in 1965 and Faubus's new home on Governor's Hill in 1966. Faubus opened his home for visitors the following year, and the guest book indicates that visitors from over 200 Arkansas towns and cities visited the home during the first 3 weeks. With these improvements and attractions, amongst many others, Madison County could enter the 1970s with a feeling of hope for continued progress. And I'd like to finish by reading another passage out of Mr. Hatfield's book about a fellow named Henry Neal. Whether or not you could call him a Huntsville icon, Henry A. Neal of Springdale would make the daily trek to Huntsville to set up his fruit stand on the northern corner of the west side of the square every day. Neal, commonly referred to as Apples, would sell fresh produce on the corner across 3 decades. Using tables and umbrellas, produce was proudly displayed on the vacant lot on the corner near the sidewalk. One thing that Huntsville always had is what you would call local characters. In order to be a local character, you had to have a keen wit, you liked to visit and tell stories, and you had just a little bit of deviousness in your demeanor. One such local character was Clint Bohannon, who owned a grocery store on the south side of the square next to the theater. One of Mr. Bohannon's pranks almost got him into a scrap with Neal. One day, Neal and Bohannon got into a pricing war. Bohannon, who had some of his produce displayed in front of his store, brought out a small blackboard and marked down his prices for apples below that of Neal's. Mr. Neal then lowered the price of his apples, Bohannon retaliating by lowering his price once again. This went on for some time to the point that both were selling apples way below cost. At that point, Bohannon would send a young man over to Neal's fruit stand to purchase all the apples. Once the young man had raised the several bushels back to the store, Bohannon would put them out front, raising the prices to the original price of the morning. Mr. Neal was not amused. Oh yes, local characters, you just don't see them anymore. I don't know if Hatfield's observation is true or not about there not being local characters anymore, but I do know that there were characters in Madison County 50 and 60 years ago, and that's what I care about. I don't care about Madison County being poor or being the butt of jokes over here in Washington County, except for that the people there met all of their challenges with a good sense of humor and mule-like determination. They were at a disadvantage, but they did not give up, even when a project spanned several decades and seemed doomed to failure. That was the age in which my grandfather grew up, and I hope I can take that same determination he also possessed into my own life to set goals and prevail toward them in the face of what seemed to be insurmountable challenges. I hope, too, that I was able to tell you all a little something new today, and thank you so much for coming.
This podcast was produced by the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. We welcome your comments. You can email us at Shiloh, that's SHILOH, at springdalear.gov. If you'd like more information about our podcast series or about the museum in general, you can visit our website at shilohmuseum.org.